IVM.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and my guest today is Harsh Shah, CEO at the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management in the UK. Boy, this is the first time that I've got a qualifying body, someone that actually qualifies people to become professionals on the show. So it's a very unique show. It's a very different show, very different guest. And we're going to talk about something that's very, very relevant in today's time. We're living in a very different world today, and things are anything but normal. And God knows when this, whatever we are living in now will go on. But it looks like to be a fairly long time. Businesses are going through unprecedented risk, and Harsh is going to walk us through how to handle this risk. So Harsh Shah, CEO and the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management in the UK. It's actually the world leader in enterprise risk management qualification across more than 140 countries. Harsh, who's also a chartered accountant like me. So Harsh, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's first start with an introduction. What exactly is the IRM, the Institute of Risk Management in UK? What is the India affiliate, and what's your background? Let's start from there.
Hi, Anupam. Thanks for inviting me to speak on this crucial subject. And, as the CEO of the India affiliate, I'm very glad to share my thoughts and perspectives on enterprise risk management. Now, I have a few questions for our listeners. Are you an aspiring marketing expert worried about reputation and branding risk? Or are you a budding entrepreneur worried about your business idea failing? Are you a procurement specialist worried about depending too much on a particular vendor? Are you a technology expert worried about potential cyber war or data theft? Or are you a family business student worried about the legacy through how you will carry out an effective succession plan? Or are you a lawyer worried about legal and non-compliance risks? Well, now you would realize how risk cuts across every business vertical, every field, every sector, and not just finance or insurance. And the Institute of Risk Management, headquartered in the UK, is the world's leading professional body for enterprise risk management qualifications from level 1 to level 5. Now, enterprise risk covers risk from a 360-degree perspective that includes all areas of business and all industries. And IRM has been driving excellence for the last 30 years and has been recognized by the industry across 143 countries. Now, if you see the situation across the globe, especially in developed economies, risk management has gained significant importance in how leaders run their businesses. Given the rise in business failures, evolving regulatory landscape, and complex changes affecting businesses, including unforeseen crises-like situations such as the COVID, organizations have started to realize the importance of risk management as a tool for strategic value for sustainable business growth. And in India too, if you see, there are regulators who have mandated companies to have a dedicated risk management process where some companies are even required to have a chief risk officer. So students can start a professional career alongside their graduation right after 12th with IRM's level 1 examination, which can be taken completely online with 1 month dedicated study time, and then gradually move to level 2, level 3, level 4, and 5, where at each level they get a formal designation that is recognized globally. And the good part is that students don't need to enroll for additional tuition, and we as IRM offer free study support sessions and webinars to prepare the students for our examinations. The India chapter primarily started 2 years back, where we realized the need to give access to our students in terms of examination centers. So now the level 2 is available at 360 examination centers in India. Level 3 is a project-based qualification, and level 4 and 5 is a designation earned because you would have certain experience by the time you reach a level 4 or 5. Now, because risk is inherent in everything we do, our students and professionals across the globe come from varied backgrounds. Either it's leadership, risk heads, family business owners, consultants, across sectors including health, insurance, pharmaceutical, financial services, technology, to name a few. So in a nutshell, I would just summarize, Anupam, that level 1 to level 5 qualifications provide a perfect pathway to become a chief risk officer or a business leader or entrepreneur with the right business risk management skills. And in a post-pandemic world, risk manager has now become a very hot job. especially with chief risk officers getting a big boost in the boardroom. And our students in India work at organizations like Aditya Birla Capital, Edelweiss, JLT, Glaxo, Deloitte, Larsen and Toubro, Swiss Reinsurance, Barclays, Morgan Stanley, AC's Consulting, to name a few. IRM has also published a lot of research papers, including few of them with Cambridge University, and we also work with Warwick University for a digital risk management qualification. So you can visit our website www.theirmindia.org for more information.
Excellent. It's fascinating. Are there any other institutes, or are you also like, you're also a CA, I'm also a CA, so, or is the India branch of the IRM the only one out there, and are you like the premier body for doing this?
Yeah. So, Anupam, we are the premier body for enterprise risk management. We are the world leader across 143 countries, like I said. There are other institutions which have dedicated focus on insurance, like you have FRM, which focuses more on financial risk management, which is a huge demand from banks and financial institutions. But as IRM, we cover all the enterprise risk, whether it's reputation, procurement, supply chain, human resources, all categories of risk that IRM covers.
Excellent. Let's get into that right now. You just said categories of risk. So, I'm sure that you have different curriculum for different levels. You said level 1 to level 5, where I'm assuming level 1 is where you start and level 5 is where you end. But in general, for our listeners to get an idea, and especially it's quite relevant in these times, what are the different type of risks that you see in the system for, say, an entrepreneur? Because our listeners are generally entrepreneurs, but and probably startup founders, and honestly, it could even be someone who's at a fairly senior level in a firm. I've never done a profiling of my audience, but at a very generic level, then two questions. One is, what type of risks are there in general, and how do people manage these risks?
Sure. So, Anupam, I would like to begin by clarifying that, risk is not negative. And if we go by the definition of risk, it covers three important words, which is effect, uncertainty, and objectives. Now, any uncertain event that impacts your objectives, either positively or negatively, is called a risk. Unfortunately, risk is always looked at from a negative perspective. In fact, when I used to interview business owners, entrepreneurs, SMEs, on an average, 90% of the people would tell me that risk always has a negative outcome. But I would say that risk doesn't come with a fixed outcome. It comes with a fixed root cause. And the consequence of the risk is always a potential event which would materialize depending on how you would manage it. Yes, we can't avoid the risk and we can't mitigate the potential consequence completely, but definitely we can reduce the impact of the risk with certain tools and techniques. Now, talking about entrepreneurs, so entrepreneurs, whether first generation or second generation, have an inherent appetite for risk. And what is this appetite? Risk appetite is the amount of risk one is willing to take. Now, why is the risk appetite different in entrepreneurs? It's because their personal predisposition towards risk is higher in terms of expectation of a certain return, plus their personal beliefs, the environment they are brought up in, the ecosystem in which they have lived, whether at home or in school or in college, provides an impetus to their risk-taking behavior. And this is what we call risk culture, the ability to take risk-based decisions. Yet, why do so many entrepreneurs fail? And there are multiple reasons, because there will be risk in every area. But the biggest root cause is the passion and attachment to the business, which makes entrepreneurs turn a blind eye in their journey towards scaling up fast, trying to beat competition, achieving quick results, and ultimately ignoring risk management as a focus area, which actually needs to be driven down to every function and not just kept at the management or promoter level. Now, every entrepreneurial venture faces innumerable risks and challenges, including difficulty in raising capital, inability to scale up the business, inefficiencies in operations and technology, challenges in retaining talent, I would say delays in even legal compliances, inability to generate revenue, which is a classic example now. So while it may not be viable for an early stage startup to invest in a risk professional, I would recommend that one of the founders or core team members should be given the position of an acting chief risk officer or risk head. And the role of the identified person should be to continuously identify potential risk, either internally or externally, using techniques like scenario planning, where you would keep analyzing what can go wrong in every decision, especially hypothetical situations. Then the second tool they can use is horizon scanning, where you can scan the environment for issues impacting other startups, and also then finally conducting interviews with all critical team members every month to identify potential events which are inherent weaknesses across all departments. Then the risk identified from these three important techniques can be discussed every month, and potential mitigation plans must be put in place. So, as mentioned earlier, considering all the types of risks, remember that not all risks can be mitigated, but putting a robust risk management process in place will ensure that you can minimize the impact and shock from these uncertain events.
Excellent. Harsh, can you just give me a few examples, maybe of, or maybe case studies that you guys have out there, or maybe a real life situation where you think that someone who has an IRM qualification could add value to a situation there?
Sure. So, Anupam, we have a lot of students who come from family business background. Some of them are budding entrepreneurs, and the survival rate of the startup has increased because whenever they're working on an idea or they're working on a new concept, they now are able to think from a 360-degree perspective. Unlike a regular entrepreneur who would have fair bit of understanding about risk, but just because their passion towards the business will make them turn a blind eye, an IRM professional has the skills like complex problem solving, analytical thinking, ability to identify negative events, and even look at opportunities. So I know one of the startups in Ahmedabad, they are supplying senior citizen products only to Japan because Japan is going through aging population. Now, aging population per se is a risk. But if you have the necessary risk knowledge, you would have converted that risk into an opportunity. I even know some startup founders who have picked up our qualifications and they're working on a business idea. And before they start the business, they have decided and made a list of more than 120 risks that they're going to face, right from supply chain, logistics, technology, considering situations like a cybersecurity issue or a data theft or a data fraud. They have now even considered a pandemic kind of a situation. So if there is a second wave or a third wave, they are planning what could be the alternative business models. What if we all have to work from home? What if our employees are going to suffer from a lot of mental health issues? So those are the kind of activities which an IRM qualified professional is ready to pick up.
Wow. So let's pick up from there, right? You just spoke about the pandemic, you spoke about various categories. So specific to the times where we're living in right now, okay, what are the kind of risk systems that the IRM is talking about to its, or teaching about, or whatever you've seen so far? Maybe if these risk management systems were already in place going into this pandemic, maybe somewhere in March, maybe things would have been better. But now we are 6 months, almost 6 months into this crisis with absolutely no sign of when it is going to end, if at all it will end. In this kind of backdrop, very unique, we've not faced this ever. What is the kind of risk management system that you're advising specific to these times?
Okay, Anupam. So, traditional risk management strategies were essentially comprised of buying insurance that was inexpensive enough so that retained risk could be managed for as little cost as possible internally. So, in other words, the typical orders for a risk manager from the top was buy the cheapest insurance possible. And optimizing traditional risk management, in essence, meant keeping within risk management's expense budget. Now, other risks that a company faces, which stem from strategic and operational failures, that made up almost 90% of the stock failures in the 1990s. And those reflect the risks that could not be traditionally transferred or traded away, and they were instead delegated to those managing the operations of the firm. Now, over the recent years, significant progress has been made in developing rules, frameworks, processes, standards for managing risks. And IRM's level 1 to level 5 qualifications cover the leading frameworks and systems. But what I want to point out is many businesses confirm that these disciplines are not in themselves sufficient to make a tangible difference to the success or failure of organization. rules can be misinterpreted, they can be misunderstood, they could be misapplied. And the missing link in understanding how to balance risk and reward successfully in decision making is what we call as the organization's risk culture. And there are corporate governance requirements around the world which are increasingly demanding that boards of organizations should understand and address their risk culture. So before we go into frameworks and rules and regulations which have been there for so many years, it's important to understand risk culture. The board has a responsibility to set, communicate, and enforce a strong risk culture that consistently influences, directs, and aligns with the strategy and objectives of the business. And this starts with the risk behaviors, the attitudes, and the culture of the board itself, and reaches down through the organization. Now, at IRM, we believe that it is possible for an organization to drive change in its risk culture. This requires a clear understanding of the current culture, and then you have to have a target culture. Then it requires recognition that this is a major change program, and it requires set disciplines to see it through. The culture change should now be treated as a change management project in its own right, with appropriate allocation of board time and resources. We call it tone at the top, right? Without the involvement of the board and the involvement of the junior most employee, you cannot implement a risk culture. And a culture cannot be rewritten simply by mandating that the values or ideology of an organization have changed. I mean, if you walk into any corporate office, in most of the meeting rooms, you would see a vision statement, a mission statement, you would see a set of values, and then you have a certain perception built towards that company that, oh, wow, this company is honest. This company is committed to the community. This company is focused on customer excellence. But that's not what risk culture is about. The organization must look at change which can be implemented by pulling on certain levers to make noticeable change in important areas. And this risk management will have to work closely with the HR on number of areas. So I would divide the entire risk culture implementation using the frameworks into 4 buckets. The first one is tone at the top, where you have the risk leadership, which provides the clarity of direction, how the organization should respond to any bad news. And when I say bad news, means any internal, external, uncertain event which may have a potential risk. The second element is what we call governance, which is the clarity of accountability for managing risk, the transparency and the timelines. If there is a risk which happens, in how much time do we need to respond? Who needs to get involved? Who is the risk champion? Does the board need to intervene? Is this a high risk? Is this a low risk? Is this a medium risk? So that is called governance. Then we come to the competency, the status, the resources, and empowerment of the risk function by having qualified risk professionals like IRM who are working across the globe. And then the risk skills, which is embedding risk management across the organization. You would need to identify one person within each department who acts like a risk champion. And he or she would then on a monthly basis report all the risk into the governance, into the risk committee. And that's where the monitoring starts. And finally, the decision making, where well-informed risk decisions are routed through a chief risk officer or a risk committee. And appropriate risk-taking rewards and performance schemes need to be implemented by an organization. There was a very interesting survey which I was reading. 68% of the employees said that if we take risks and if we manage them, our incentives are not linked to that. So that means organizations are not rewarding employees with the risk-taking behavior, and that requires a culture change.
Great. That's a long list of things out there. Folks, I hope that's useful to you. We're going to take a small break out here. On the other side of this break, we're going to talk about risk literacy and what IRM India does to equip young entrepreneurs to make the right decisions on the risk part. My guest, Harsha, CEO and the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management UK. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
I want to thank Intel for supporting our show. We're all loving working from home, but let's be honest, there are complications to this. For example, getting help from IT folks if your PC is down can be a challenge because you can't just walk up to the IT support desk anymore to get your issue sorted out. Well, you'll be happy to hear that I have a solution for all your work from home pains. The Intel vPro platform. The platform comes packed with Intel Active Management technology that lets your IT teams remotely manage your system, fix the problems even when the PCs aren't near them or are unresponsive, especially with the reduced desk site visits. So it means more time getting your work done and less time spent on getting support. What's more, the vPro platform also maximizes all your PC security, stability, and performance needs. Visit intel.in/more with vPro, that's VPRO, to discover how you can do more of what you want and less of what you don't. If you're listening on the IVM Podcast Android app, you will be able to click the link that's visible to you now.
And welcome back to this really special episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Harsha, CEO and the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management in the UK. In the first part of this episode, we spoke about different types of risk, different types of system, different types of frameworks. Now, maybe you guys are wondering as to why are we talking so much about risk and how is this actually important to you or relevant to you? Well, this half is going to be about two things in specific. I'm going to start on the first and you'll understand in the second question what I'm talking about. So first, Harsh, welcome back. So now I'm an investor in the markets, okay? And I'm seeing that much of chaos and so much of uncertainty that's going on, and that's giving me a lot of opportunity to invest in stocks also. Of course, in the last 6 months, the benchmark indices have fallen. In general, they've recovered from that shock that had happened out there. But we know that the impact of this pandemic is actually going to be in the long term, or what we call post-pandemic maybe. So tell our listeners, what is the importance of risk literacy? What all do I need to know if I want to invest in the right sectors after this pandemic, or even right now for that matter? Let's start from there, and we'll get to the question later. Go on.
Okay. So, Anupam, I want to share something personal. I found passion in this subject at a very early age. And, I've been delivering sessions on enterprise risk management since the age of 21 to typically explain people the benefits of risk-based decision making, not just from a quantitative perspective, but understanding the qualitative risk management as well. Now, if you ask me about risk literacy, it's traditionally understood as the ability to perceive the risk that individuals, communities, and environments are exposed to and derive appropriate decision from that awareness about the risk after evaluating all the pros and cons, threats, and opportunities. Now, if we dissect this definition, it boils down to having a risk culture, which I've been stressing on in the last 15 minutes. So, right from the time an individual wakes up till the time he sleeps, there are so many decisions he's facing. There's so many risks he's facing. He has to constantly evaluate between pros and cons. Whether should I invest here? Should I invest there? Should I put my money in a startup? Or should I park it in an FD? Should I look at equity? Should I just put it in a savings account right now? So that requires a risk literacy. Now, taking the example of the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA in 2008, I'm sure most of our listeners would be aware that many people lost their homes, jobs, and all their assets simply because they were not aware about the fact that their loans were at an adjustable rate and not a fixed rate. And many people agreed to the adjustable rate, not fully understanding the implications of their loan agreement. And some probably, they hoped that they'd have more money by the time their mortgage adjusted to a higher payment. Never something you want to do now. So imagine losing everything you have just because you did not perform a what can go wrong analysis, as I call it, and completely ignored the situation. Now, coming to the post-pandemic world, Anupam, people need to be better prepared to identify uncertainties and then invest in sectors keeping in mind the opportunities and threats. With the average lifespan of a company which is declining, if you see some of the Fortune 500 list or Forbes 500 list or even the S&P 500 index, the average lifespan of a company is coming down to 12 years. That's the prediction. And considering the unprecedented changes in the external environment every 6 months to 1 year, let me give you a few examples like climate change. We have water crisis. Then we have cyber attacks. Aging population is an issue in some of the countries. We also have increasing national sentiment like Black Lives Matter. We have the Sushant Singh Rajput issue in India. Then unstable political environment in certain countries. We're talking about rising urbanization, growing middle class, rising disparity between poor and the rich. Each of these trends have a potential impact on the stock or the company that you want to invest in. And you need to look at, from a risk perspective, which sectors are really susceptible to these threats and which sectors shall prove to be an opportunity. So I think, risk literacy as a skill can provide a solid foundation to an investment strategy. Now, for a retail investor, if you're reading a draft red herring prospectus, a DRHP before an IPO, or you're looking at an annual report before investing in a stock, don't just look at those P ratios and trends and earnings per share alone. You need to become risk literate and start using risk based research by evaluating the credibility of the management, look at the sustainability of the business model, look at the quality of the product or service, look at the size of the competition, look at negative news about that company, and I would say also other companies in that sector. Then start looking at defaults in statutory payments, look at contingent liabilities, and these are some of the qualitative aspects which one needs to now evaluate before taking an investment.
Great, Harsh. So this is the last question, honestly, because I want our listeners to understand how they can improve their understanding of risk and probably make better decisions, whether it's in their investments, probably even, maybe to some extent in their personal lives, and of course in their business, in their profession. So tell us about IRM. IRM, what exactly they do and how.
But before that, Anupam, I just want to add. I just want to add that one must remember the disclaimer. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risk. Now that is where the definition of risk really starts. So before making any investment, why is it that people are cautioning you? Because they are wanting you to read the terms and conditions. They are wanting the investor to be empowered with the decision to decide whether should I invest in A stock, should I invest in B stock, should I look at mutual fund portfolio A, B, C. Of course, you have wealth managers, you have portfolio managers, you have stockbrokers who are there to support you. But as an individual, don't just blindly follow those tips in the market. Look at situations, look at the qualitative factors, see what's the background of the management, see the annual report, what are the trends that they are talking about. Is there a market size which exists in the coming 5 years for a product like this? When to sell, when to look at a long term strategy. So these are the aspects that you need to consider, and that's where risk literacy is important.
Great. So tell us more. I mean, how exactly does the IRM aid young entrepreneurs to evaluate risk, make the right investments? Walk us through the course, the amount of time, the qualification, maybe even the costing if you can.
Sure. So firstly, IRM has been focusing on enterprise risk management since 1986, like I said. And our students and professionals are typically equipped with complex problem solving, analytical thinking, and decision making skills to be able to manage risks, crises, and even black swan events. Now, if I talk from a business point of view or even an organization point of view, the role of any business leader or even a head of a department or an entrepreneur or a typical risk professional is very complex, and it demands a wide range of skills. And our qualifications and education actually empower you with that thought process to evaluate everything from supply chain to human resources, the ability to maintain relationships with stakeholders, the power to persuade employees and board of directors, and finally that financial literacy as well, to understand not only a company's balance sheet but be prepared with solutions for hypothetical situations. So our level 1 examination is conducted online every month. Once the student completes the level 1, of course, level 1 can be taken up anytime after 12th alongside graduation or post-graduation. So a student need not leave their current study or their career, because we even have working professionals who take the level 1 examination. Then they migrate to level 2, which gives them a formal designation IRM cert. And level 2 can be given in June and November, requires 6 to 9 months study. Level 3 is a complete project-based application where you need to submit your research paper after about 12 months of study. And then 4 and 5, there's no exam. You get a formal designation, which is CMIRM, Certified Member and Certified Fellow of the Institute of Risk Management. So this really is a pathway towards reaching a senior business leader position or a chief risk officer or an entrepreneur with the right skill sets. So IRM's qualifications are just not for risk professionals, but anyone and everyone who needs to manage risk in their respective role, including preparing for global catastrophes with domino-like consequences that contain a whole list of potential sub-crisis and sub-risk. Now, if you see, if there is a risk, there's always going to be a root cause. Now, for that root cause, there's going to be another root cause. So there's no end to this interconnectivity or interdependency of risk. And right from level 1, since you asked me, We cover understanding of global risk, risk identification techniques, development of a risk appetite, evaluating and scoring the risk, arriving at mitigation plans, communicating that with your organization, and finally, it ends at that governance which I spoke about in risk culture, where you have an effective policy, a risk management policy which you can use for your organization. So I would say that looking at our students as well, they come from various backgrounds. It's not just a finance guy or a lawyer or a commerce graduate who's picking up IRM's qualification. We have students who are marketing students and they want to manage brand and reputation risk. We have family business students who want to manage the risk of a potential family business failure. So I would say, Anupam, the application is across the board, and that's why enterprise risk management is becoming the need of the hour.
Fantastic. Harsh, last thing, where can our listeners get to know more about you and reach out, and maybe if they want more details, what should they do?
Great. So they can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Harsh, Hersh Shah. And they can connect with IRM India on www.theirmindia.org, which is THEIRMINDIA.org. And you can follow us on social media on Instagram, IRM India, Facebook, IRM India, and LinkedIn, IRM India.
Fantastic. Folks, that was Harsh Shah, CEO and the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management UK. I hope you like this episode, right? Because I was, going into it, I was wondering how exactly is a qualification body, after all, relevant, and that too in risk, relevant for our podcast. But I think after hearing Harsh, I think it's, the concept of risk is everywhere in our life, in any case, 365 days a year. Even more important now in this pandemic across, like I said, your investments, your portfolio, your life, your business, your job. So that's why I think this episode was really, really important for us. Harsh Shah, CEO and the India affiliate for the Institute of Risk Management UK. Harsh, thank you so much for taking out the time for doing this.
Thanks a lot, Anupam. My pleasure. And I hope the listeners, value this subject in a post-pandemic world where, our mission is to really develop a strong risk management community and ensure that businesses build sustainable models.
Fantastic. That's a great positive note to wrap up the episode. And listeners, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am B50 on Twitter. And thank you so much for listening to Paisa Vaisa.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Intel. It's been a great week on the network this week. If you haven't been paying attention, please do listen to some of the shows. We had Chetan Bhagat. This was the first returning guest on Cyrus Says. Do check that out. Great episode. We had Palak Zatakia on Advertising is Dead. Really interesting conversation was had with Varun. We had another crossover on the habit codes. Zarina Poonawala showed up over there to have a discussion with Ashton about anxiety and pressure. Begin the Journey with Ashish Vidyarthi continues to kill it. Please definitely do check it out. An old friend, Vijay Koshi, was on Storytellers and Storysellers. Do check that out as well. And I'd like to mention one thing. If you're a Tamil speaker, you should definitely check out our podcast, Kadai Podcast Punyan Selvan. Kavita Jiva has done a fantastic job to finish up her first story. It is the last episode which just came out last Monday. Do check it out if you speak Tamil. It is an incredible achievement. Please do check that out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey, available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.
Have you ever wondered how successful people do their thing? How do they navigate the challenges they often face? Are you wondering about the future of restaurants, film, education, technology, and everything else in between? Hi, I'm Gauri Devidyal, best known for being one of the brains behind The Table, an award-winning restaurant in Bombay. One thing my life as a restaurateur has given me is the opportunity to meet with some truly inspiring people, most often just by chatting with strangers at the community table. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about learning the new dimensions of business and understanding how different people swim this sea. It's an opportunity for me to pick their brains and ask them all the questions on my mind, whether it's about learning from their past experiences or talking about future trends. Through their journeys, stories, and insights, I hope you too, like me, will come away inspired and energized. So come, join me every Wednesday with your favorite drink, because this round is on me.